You're listening to the Monocle Daily, first broadcast on the 18th of December 2024 on Monocle Radio.
Canada may shortly be advertising for a new Prime Minister. Germany already is. How difficult could the next 4 years get for American news media? And how not to stow away by air and by land. I'm Andrew Muller. The Monocle Daily starts now. Hello and welcome to the Monocle Daily, coming to you from our studios here at Midori House in London. I'm Andrew Muller. My guests Terry Stiastny and John Everard will discuss the day's big stories, and our On This Day historical series will recall the modest, even ridiculous beginnings of the spectacle now known as the Super Bowl. Stay tuned, all that and more coming up right here on the Monocle Daily. This is the Monocle Daily. I'm Andrew Muller, and I am joined today by Terry Stiastny, political journalist and author, and by John Everard, former British diplomat, UK ambassador to Belarus, Uruguay and North Korea. Hello.
Hello.
It occurs to me to ask at this point, John, did you ever actually spend Christmas in Pyongyang?
Oh, yes. Christmas in Pyongyang, big festival. The different embassies take it in turn to host. I managed to be there when the Brits didn't have to do it, but I was there for the Romanian hosting and the German hosting, both of whom laid on splendid parties with lots and lots of local liquor and copious amounts of food. Everybody went away very happy.
I'm sure, but do the local people in North Korea pay any attention at all to Christmas, or not so much?
No, they don't.
You don't get posters of Kim Jong-un in a big red suit and a long white beard and...
That's a radical new idea. We should work on that. But no, in my time, that hadn't yet taken flight. I mean, in North Korea, they're only just adopting a lot of the South Korean festivals, Autumn Festival and so on. Christmas is probably a bridge too far. They look on with amazement as Westerners consume amounts of food that North Koreans can only dream of, and sat there sort of drinking the finest liquor and just wish.
Terry, you, by way of contrast, will not be spending Christmas anywhere even slightly like Pyongyang. In fact, I know for a fact you are spending Christmas in one of the places on Earth probably least like Pyongyang.
Probably, yes. It's a very pretty and picturesque village in the middle of the Cotswolds, which is, not a lot like Pyongyang, except probably that everybody does think the same thing. That's about the only point of similarity that I could find. But no, it should be nice. Should be very pretty. Lots of food. Probably no North Korean liquor.
Not a lot of blood-curdling posters decrying American imperialism. It's a while since I've been to the Cotswolds.
Yeah, they have a lot of those. Yeah.
That actually does sound quite pleasant. So I was about to say present instead of pleasant because the Christmas thing had got in my head and... God, it's only Wednesday. But anyway, we will start properly in Canada, where Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is attempting to clamber out from under the bus, beneath which he has been ushered by his Finance Minister, Chrystia Freeland. Freeland resigned earlier this week with what was not so much a valedictory statement as a grenade tossed over one shoulder as she exited the building. Trudeau, already unpopular and facing an election in October at the latest, is also increasingly menaced by the President-elect of Canada's neighbour to the south. And there is a bunch more on this in today's Foreign Desk Explainer, which you can listen to when you are done listening to this. But Terry, you are normally an observer of British politics, though, of course, some dynamics are quite widely applicable, especially to a country like Canada, which borrowed its system of government substantially from the United Kingdom. To put it in technical terms, how absolutely stuffed is Justin Trudeau at the moment?
I think he is quite absolutely stuffed. I mean, just one thing I will add in here. So having observed British politics, but I have also observed Chrystia Freeland because I was a student with her briefly and I knew her a bit when she was a young journalist. And she is not somebody that you want to cross. She is a really, really determined person. Even back in those days, she was always sort of pushing stories, going out and doing stuff, very forcefully arguing her case in terms of things. So, I'm not saying I could see this coming, but she is somebody who knows her own mind and usually sort of expresses it quite forcefully.
Did she ever write a passive-aggressive public letter seeking to destroy you?
No, I wasn't enough. She was very nice to me because I was no threat to her. But I remember seeing her arguing or debating with kind of news desk editors as to why, I think it was something to do with Ukraine at the time, was an extremely big story. And you were left in no doubt that this was, according to her, an extremely big story that should be in the newspaper in a very big way. So, so not somebody you want to cross, I wouldn't say.
John, why is, where has it all gone askew for Justin Trudeau? Is it just a thing? And it often is, I think, this simple in parliamentary democracies. He's been there for 10 years and everyone's sick of him.
Yes, he's been there for a very long time, and there's a kind of tiredness that crept in. The main reason he's in such political trouble is the economy. I mean, in Canada, accommodations become less and less affordable, real strains on all kinds of natural resources, questions over employment, and so on and so forth. But the immediate killer was the response to Donald Trump's threat to slap 25% tariffs on Canada if something isn't done about the northern border, about which Canadians feel the Americans are being quite unfair. I mean, their real problem isn't the northern border with Canada, it's the southern border with Mexico. But try telling that to Donald Trump. And it looks as if this has finally split him from Freeland. I mean, Freeland and he have been an item almost. I mean, they've been very close political allies. But she clearly feels that he is simply not being tough enough on Trump, and he needs to stand up and fight rather than try to find any kind of halfway house with Trump, which appears to be what he's doing.
I mean, she also would, I think, Terry, fairly clearly like to be Prime Minister one day, and I will therefore again prevail upon your recollections of the Chrystia Freeland I know. Was she one of those people? I mean, you say that she was very ambitious and very determined, and obviously there is nothing wrong with either of those things. They are commendable qualities. But was she one of those people who talked at an early stage in life about grand plans to become Prime Minister or whatever?
Not really. Not as much as some of the sort of the British, would-be politicians that I knew, who you could really see were already kind of laying the groundwork. But she was very much more interested in kind of international affairs, in going to Ukraine, in sort of, it was that kind of early 90s time when, things were just opening up. And so that was really kind of what she was interested in then. But I think it's interesting now that, as you say, she obviously thinks she would be someone who'd be better at negotiating a trade agreement. She's kind of looking back and saying, well, look, I've done this in the past. Effectively, you've got to play hardball with Trump, and there is no point trying to play nice with him. So I think, that is where she's aiming at, and that's obviously where she and Trudeau have fallen out.
John, those tariffs Trump is proposing of 25% on certain Canadian goods would obviously be bad for Canada's economy. They probably wouldn't be great for the United States economy either. Canada is America's biggest trading partner, I think I'm right in saying. But does Canada have to proceed on the assumption that Donald Trump doesn't actually care all that much?
He certainly doesn't respond to that kind of threat. Whether it's because he doesn't care or simply because he doesn't understand the threat, maybe one day we'll find out. Remember, this is a man who's going to be going around saying that tariff is the most beautiful word in the dictionary, which suggests he ought to read some more books, but never mind. And without the thought that if you impose tariffs on somebody, you'll like to get them imposing tariffs on you back. And a lot of very angry American companies explaining why this is a bad thing for the American economy. He tried this to a limited extent in his first term, but was held back by the guardrails that at that stage were still in place in the American Constitution. If he really does let rip in his second term, throwing tariffs around willy-nilly as he's threatening to, I think he's going to come in for a naughty surprise.
Terry, Trump's current shtick as well, and I will concede that if we assume he's joking, this actually is one of his better gags, is to continue addressing Justin Trudeau as governor and referring to Canada as the great 51st state. Is this Trump just attempting to bully and belittle Justin Trudeau, who he clearly cannot stand personally or politically, or should we be braced for a special military operation in the new year?
I mean, you'd like to see them try, really, wouldn't you? It's quite, like ground war with Canada, I think is probably not on his agenda for coming in at the second term. But obviously, he knows it riles Canadians up, and he obviously thinks,
they set
in a
fire
slightly,
to the White House in 1812.
South Park way that this is the way to go.
It's It's almost tempting, though, John. I can see that there would be political difficulties attached to this for Justin Trudeau. Why not call his bluff? Just say, all right, we're in. And good luck to the Republican Party ever getting the presidency again when, I mean, it's about the size of California, population-wise Canada. That's another 54 electoral college votes, which would be likely, you would think, to land in the Democrats' lap.
That's quite a thought. Actually, what I was going to suggest was that you play it the other way, that Trudeau resigns and forces a general election so that the Conservatives face the wrath of Donald Trump and his 25% tariffs, and the Liberals then sit it out on the sidelines, munching their popcorn, watching the opposition, as currently is, tie itself into ever tighter knots, and then surge to victory in the next general election in Canada. Trudeau, of course, is young. He can wait.
Well, it is a tempting thought. I mean, might that actually not be... If you're looking at this from Justin Trudeau's perspective, or if you're advising Justin Trudeau, Terry, he can just think, well, I have done 10 years. I could now push off and, as John suggests, give the hospital pass to the opposition. I can go away and write my score-settling memoir and either think of what I want to do with the rest of my life or come back and have another crack at this.
Yeah, it certainly might be, a tempting thought, given that you've already got, not only your former finance minister, but also a group of your other MPs coming up to you and saying, look, Justin, it's time to stand down, it's time to go. And as we've seen in Britain, when that starts to happen, things can unravel quite quickly. So, whether you just walk away and do that, and leave the Conservatives to try and sort it out if they then come in.
Well, to Germany, where unless he is seeing different and better polls to everyone else, Chancellor Olaf Scholz has this week begun the end of his time in the chancellery. Earlier this week, Scholz called a vote of confidence in his own government in the certain knowledge he would lose it to prompt an early election. Germans will vote on February 23rd or thereabouts, and campaigning is underway. Friedrich Merz, who is leading the Conservative charge of the Christian Democratic Union, is going hard on liberating the economy, promising to slash personal and corporate taxes. Scholz and his Social Democrats propose a sort of German Bidenomics, heavy on public investment, and all are twitchy about polls placing the feral populists of Alternative for Deutschland in second place. John, whether Europe wants it or is ready for it or not, would Friedrich Merz essentially be the Merkel restoration?
No, Merz has got a much harder edge to him than old Angie had. He is much tougher on welfare dodgers. He regards quite large parts of the welfare state as simply surplus to requirements, and he would bring public expenditure crashing down quite hard. Much closer to a right-wing British Tory than to Angela Merkel. The big question is, I think it's a racing certainty that his party will do very well in this election. Whether they do well enough for him to be able to form a government by himself or with the FDP, who have been in with the traffic light coalition so far, or whether the numbers demand that the AfD finally gets a say in government. And that would be something of a gulp maker across Germany. I mean, having somebody like Alice Weidel with her fingers on the levers of power, I think would send shivers down a lot of spines.
Well, it would be something of a gulp maker across Europe and the wider democratic world, you would have to think, Terry. But is that threshold John suggests of an AfD surge to the extent that someone's going to feel obliged to incorporate them into government, is that actually feasible? Because what everybody has said so far is that we absolutely will not countenance dealing with these people, the cordon sanitaire. I'm not sure what the German translation of that is. But we did see something similar in Ireland, not so much after its most recent election, but the one before that, where Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil went into a grand coalition to keep out Sinn Féin. Is that not impossible or is that impossible in Germany, that the other parties might just say, we don't care who else we have to cooperate with as long as these people aren't in charge?
I think that would probably be the sort of general political view, is that we've got to try and do everything that we can to avoid, that big step, that big Rubicon of saying we're going to bring the AfD into government. I mean, you've seen a lot harder rhetoric in terms of particularly immigration. If you look at the CDU's manifesto, they're talking about there can be no right to stay in Germany for immigrants if they break the law. They're talking about being strong on law and order. So they are trying to move onto the turf in a sort of way to try and say, look, we can deal with some of these issues that people seem to be concerned about. But I think, they would probably rather, come together despite their differences than actually, start approaching the AFD. And we've seen, similar discussions going on, in lots of places in Holland and in Austria as well. But, it's a difficult step for people to take, and in Germany of all places, particularly more so.
As we look ahead to that election in February, John, is there any point at all in considering the prospect of a miraculous resurrection for Scholz?
I think that would represent a major advance in porcine aviation. Scholz is toast, both personally and politically. His ratings are through the floor, and nobody believes in his party anymore. It's been driven with all kinds of scandals. It's regarded as inefficient, and quite often it's put forward budgets where the sums just didn't seem to add up. The latest one, of course, no exception. Where are you going to get 100 million euros from, as he keeps saying? Whether he'll be prepared to go into coalition with Merz's CDU, I think Germany is not like the Netherlands. It's not like a lot of other European countries. The differences between the Socialists and the Conservatives are actually much greater, and the personal animosities also are much greater. Yes, a grand coalition would solve the AfD problem, but I'm not sure that it's actually politically or personally feasible.
Merz, going back to him, Terry, who does seem by far the likeliest next German chancellor, does seem to think that the Germany's current economic underperformance is almost an affront to the natural order. But do you get the sense that it is also causing further anxiety across Europe? Because it has been for years the one thing on which everybody always thought they could rely, that Germany will be the steadily thrumming motor at the heart of the continent.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you look at a Germany that has got negligible growth for the last year, is predicted to have negligible growth into next year. And, all the big industries which Germany's come to rely on, the car industry is in trouble. People want Germany to be able to fund Europe, essentially. And they're saying, well, you're going to need to contribute more on defence, you're going to need to contribute more to the EU. And Germany's effectively saying, well, look, we can't afford it. We haven't got the budget deficit. We can't keep putting money into things unless we can start to get economic growth going. And this is what Merz keeps saying he's trying to do. He's trying to say, we'll cut taxes, we'll be more efficient, we will get this powerhouse back up and running again. But it's difficult to see how you do that immediately without people saying, well, we're relying on our social security network and we're relying on all the things that we have come to treasure and expect.
Well, let's look now at the United States, and one might suppose that if one was preparing to assume the presidency thereof, one might find more pressing things to do with one's days than pursue petty personal vendettas against local newspapers. One would not be President-elect Donald Trump. Trump has filed a lawsuit against the Des Moines Register, which upset him late in the recent presidential election campaign by publishing a poll which put Vice President Kamala Harris 3 points ahead of Trump in the Hawkeye state, whose 6 electoral college votes Trump went on to win comfortably. The suit follows ABC settling out of court with Trump to the tune of $16 million to buy off a defamation action, and another suit against CBS's 60 Minutes. John, ABC settling, how big a hole might they have dug for the rest of the American media there? Because to be clear, this struck me at least as legal tap dancing on the head of a pin. ABC was sued because they had repeatedly said in a broadcast that Trump had been found liable for rape by a New York court, whereas what the court actually found him liable for was sexual battery and defamation. I'm not sure how long you'd live on the difference.
Well, $15 million worth is quite a big difference to have to cough up. How far have they caused problems for the rest of the American media? I think considerable problems. I mean, this isn't about this single case. This is all psychology. And Trump's win over ABC will leave him cock-a-hoop and encourage him to try this again. As he's said in the past, what he's really trying to do when he goes for the media is not to win, but simply to tie media organisations up in legal knots and to drain their coffers by forcing them to expend huge amounts of money on legal fees. But if he finds that from time to time he can win, he'll be encouraged to yet greater efforts in this way. It's a bad day for American freedoms.
Because this is a common dynamic in the powerful bringing suits of this kind, not just in the United States and not just against, American newspapers, Terry. It's not so much for the media organisation, it's not the thought that they might lose the case. It is, as John said, that we can either settle this so this goes away, or we can commit to God knows how much wasted time, wasted energy and wasted money.
Yeah, because you think, a really tough editor would probably have said, OK, we'll issue an apology. We'll say at the end of the news or whatever, sorry, we misreported that. We apologise for any inconvenience and we're done. But
we wish to make it clear that Mr. Trump has been found liable merely for sexual battery and defamation.
Just put that up in big letters and at the end of the news and say, right, you're done with that. But I mean, I think the real danger, is the idea that when you go to that same editor next week, and if there's a sort of investigative reporter or somebody who's been looking into another story about Trump and says, we've got this, we're going to run it, the bosses and the lawyers will go, ooh, hang on, I'm not sure we should be doing that. That it's that kind of caution, that like preemptive caution to say we don't want to be critical, we don't want to get in trouble, and that is one of the big dangers before anything even gets published or makes it to air. Because
to bring it back to this suit against the Des Moines Register, John, it doesn't actually matter for Trump's purposes, does it, that this suit and finer legal minds than mine have already said that this is just absurd. A newspaper printed a poll in good faith. It turned out they were wrong. Polls very, very often are.
Moreover, the paper has published the details now of the poll, which show that they followed proper procedures and they took a respectable sample. The fact the poll was wrong wasn't an attempt to undermine Trump for political reasons. No, you're quite right. This won't worry Trump in the slightest. He will instruct his lawyers just to drag this on and on and on. I mean, the Des Moines Register is not a major national media institution. Their coffers won't be that deep. And at some point, they will simply run out of money and be forced to settle. And he knows it.
Can we hold out any hope, Terry, that once he's actually sworn in, he will, he will have better things to do with his day than this kind of thing?
Not really. I mean, I think, Trump obviously has constantly seemed to have lawsuits of one sort or another going on, either, pursuing them or defending them. And despite, the sort of slightly random nature of some of his lawyers that we've seen over time, he seems to, carve out part of his day for that. So I think I can't see that he would stop.
And just finally on this one, John, because it is of the many things of the Trump phenomenon that has intrigued / perplexed me. This is quite high on the list. It is the fact that he does seem to be revered by many of his base as this, indestructible macho paladin, and yet I have never known of a public figure that I can recall who spends so much of his time indulging in abject self-pitying whinging, but it does not cut through, which is especially risible coming from a billionaire who has twice been elected president of the United States. Your grounds for complaint are limited at that point, and yet it doesn't seem to put anybody off.
I don't think he or his followers will see this as whinging. This is him simply reacting sharply and decisively against those who dare to criticise him or to question him, which is what true macho neo-dictators should do. He's slipping into the role. This is where Putin started. It's how Xi Jinping started to crush the Chinese press, and Trump is following the same path.
Well, now to the question of how many times someone has to do something daft before it becomes kind of impressive. Earlier this month, a US residing Russian citizen named Svetlana Dali was apprehended after stowing away on a Delta Airlines flight from New York City to Paris. She was charged and released without bail pending trial, but with an ankle monitor and conditions, one of which, not unreasonably, was to stay away from airports. Listener, she has not necessarily behaved herself subsequently. She has had her collar felt again, this time for removing her anklet and attempting to bolt for Canada aboard a Greyhound bus. John, the FSB's recruiters have really got less fussy, haven't they?
Yes, it's not looking good, is it? I mean, we really are scraping the bottom of the barrel here. Particularly, if you watch the video of her being removed from that aircraft, you are left with the impression of a woman who's got deep, deep problems. I mean, the screaming fit was what I'd normally associate with a maladjusted teenager. The FSB handlers must be tearing their hair out by now.
Should somebody be making some sort of series or game show here? Like, each week Svetlana tries to stow away on some or other vessel to some or other different destination and sees how far she gets?
I don't think she's going to get very far, given that she hasn't, she occasionally managed to cut off an ankle monitor. And yeah, as John says, she's somebody who has obviously got some fairly significant personal problems going on there. But I think, you're quite lucky, actually, in these days to stow away on an aircraft and not actually to be shot by someone. I mean, if you tried to get into, any country where you are going in without a passport, without a ticket and hiding yourself in the loos until somebody comes and finds you, I mean, you're pretty lucky to be sent back anywhere in one piece, I think.
Because I wanted to close by asking you each in turn whether you have ever... I mean, a country, if possible, but John, have you ever snuck into or out of a particular place under extremely dubious pretexts which may not have stood up in a court of law?
I've been a stowaway in a train. Does that count?
Go on. How did you do that?
That was in Belarus, where I boarded a train from Minsk to the far west, to the Polish border, and didn't have a ticket. And the ticket inspector came along and said, where's your ticket? I don't have one. So ticket inspector's boss pitched up, and I bribed them a whole pound, which they made clear was fine. That was plenty of money, and for that they stopped the train for me just before the checkpoint by the border, so I could hop down the staff ladder, wave them a cheery goodbye, and disappear into the forest.
I'm appalled, John. I mean, this is no kind of way to represent Her Majesty's government abroad.
Tee-hee.
Terry, what about you? Because back before Google became much of a thing, and you can't really pull it off anymore because somebody just has to Google your name and there you are, journalist. I did once sneak into Milosevic-era Serbia, as it then was, under extremely dubious circumstances and an extremely dubious pretext, which was clearly understood to be very dubious by the border guard, who mercifully decided that he simply could not be bothered arresting me and the photographer and just told us to get back on the minibus and continue with our journey. He did not use precisely the phrase continue with your journey, but it was words to that effect.
Well, yeah, I realise that I'm obviously far too law-abiding, and I realised this because quite recently, I was about to get on a plane with, a perfectly legitimate passport in my own name that I was allowed to have, but I realised I had gone into the country, I had gone into Latvia on my European passport, and I went back to go out of the country, took my British passport out because I was going to come back into Britain on the British passport, and this a very stern, rather sort of, Baltic, sort of Slavic lady who kind of looked at me and in a very did you come into the country on this part? Why is there no entry stamp in your passport? And I just sort of quavered and handed over the correct passport. So I thought, I'm obviously not cut out for this line of work or anything dubious, because I was just far too wide-eyed and naive.
Well, on that shocking revelation, Terry Stiastny and John Everard, thank you both for joining us. Finally, on today's show, our On This Day historical feature recalls the unlikely, indeed undignified origin story of the glitzy spectacle we know now as the Super Bowl. The most watched television broadcast in the history of the United States sounded like this.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
The next 9 most watched television broadcasts in the history of the United States have all sounded at least something like this.
Kelsey at the bottom is going to come in a little short motion.
Mahomes looking that way, throwing that way. Kelsey got it! Touchdown!
The Super Bowl, the climactic fixture of the National Football League season, is now one of the world's biggest television events. Last season's Super Bowl, in which the Kansas City Chiefs saw off the San Francisco 49ers, drew nearly 124 million viewers inside the US, 62 million more around the world. That number possibly swelled somewhat by people at least as interested in one inhabitant of the stands as in events on the field.
I know we want to talk about football right now, but as I look at Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift, we've been talking about the relationship all year long. That right there is special.
The genesis of this colossus was altogether more modest. On December 18th, 1932, the very first NFL playoff game was played in front of just 12,000 people with hastily improvised rules atop dirt raked across an indoor ice hockey rink. The NFL had started becoming a thing in 1920, initially known as the American Professional Football Association. Not one of the 14 clubs which contested the first APFA season still exists in their original form. A shame, as who would not relish a contest between the Columbus Panhandles and the Rochester Jeffersons? In these, the primordial years of the NFL, the title of champion was decided in the manner of European soccer leagues. The team that sat atop the table at season's end was awarded the title. Some of those early champions included the Canton Bulldogs, the Frankfurt Yellow Jackets, and the Providence Steamroller. But season 1932 ended with two teams leading the league with identical records, the Portsmouth Spartans and the Chicago Bears. The bright idea was had of a winner-take-all playoff, potentially a valuable revenue raiser in the depths of the Great Depression. The plan was to play the game at Wrigley Field, home ground then of the Bears, home ground to this day of baseball team the Chicago Cubs, pride of Chicago's North Side. The plan had not reckoned, however, with the prevailing weather of a Chicago December. Though the modern NFL traditionally adopts a stoical attitude to such matters, games are often played through conditions which would have seen the Battle of Stalingrad called off, there are limits. With snow heaping in Chicago's streets, Wrigley Field waist-deep, and further blizzards expected, the inaugural playoff was moved indoors to Chicago Stadium, home rink of hockey team, the Chicago Blackhawks. This presented a fundamental problem, i.e. that a hockey rink is made of ice on top of concrete and is considerably smaller than a football field. The former problem was solved by borrowing the dirt and bark used by the circus which had recently performed in the same venue. Wincing spectators clutching handkerchiefs to their noses suspected that it wasn't just dirt and bark, and that the recently departed circus elephants may well have made a contribution. The smaller playing surface was addressed with rapid rewrites to the rules of American football, with somewhat farcical consequences. Legend insists that one punt sailed over the rink's barriers and clouted the arena's organist, and that another hit the sign proclaiming the usual home team's name, turning the Blackhawks into the Ackhawks. The game was reckoned more a curiosity than a classic, one unimpressed sports writer of the day inveighing thus, doubtless while wearing a trilby with a card reading press tucked into the hatband and chewing furiously on a cigar.
There have been comical happenings on the football battlefields without number, but herewith is submitted the champion football comic strip.
Chicago won it 9-zip, abetted in no small measure by the fact that the Spartans' superstar quarterback, Dutch Clark, had been unable to get time off work to play in the game. The only touchdown was scored by Bears legend Red Grange. It was the 1930s, so men were called things like Dutch and Red. This was about as good as it ever got for the Portsmouth Spartans. The team was sold in 1934 and relocated from Ohio to Michigan, where they have since been better known and have since largely sucked as the Detroit Lions. The Chicago Bears have endured, though with only one Super Bowl win to show for their labours in the decade since, by their fabulous 1985 team, founded on a terrifying defensive unit and stacked with such folk heroes as swashbuckling quarterback Jim McMahon, freakish running back Walter Payton, and lumbering Leviathan William the Refrigerator Perry.
That one registered 3.8. Another Super Bowl record, the first refrigerator to score.
It was the 1980s, so there was a dreadful novelty rap hit.
We are the Bears, shuffling crew, shuffling on down, doing it for you. We're so
Everything has to start somewhere, and those beginnings are usually modest, even of the most oppressively inescapable ritual. The first Christmas itself was a pretty low-key affair. Those who react cynically to the gaudy showbiz glitz of the 21st century Super Bowl may perceive apt allegory in its inception on this day 92 years ago as a nakedly commercial bastardization of sport staged on a dung heap. For Monocle Radio, I'm Andrew Muller. And that is all for this edition of The Daily. Thanks to our panellists today, Terry Stiastny and John Everard. The show was produced by Monica Lillis and researched by Maisie Ringer. Our sound engineer was Elliot Greenfield. I'm Andrew Muller here in London. The Daily is back at the same time tomorrow. Thanks for listening.